Hey witches, it's Lee and this is Do Magical Thing, and let's have a little chat about altars, shall we? That's A-L-T-A-R, not A-L-T-E-R, which is to transform or to change. And altars are something we see quite a lot of throughout witchy social media, especially at the change of seasons. You see a lot of witches sharing their layouts. And it's interesting to note that you also get the opposite, you know, people who will never put their altar on any kind of sort of photograph or let it be photographed, let other people touch it or even look at it. So we have this kind of difference there, but we also have traditions that have different ways of setting an altar up that are quite key and full of symbolism and are sort of required for anyone who's practitioner or who is a practitioner of that particular practice. So lots of different variety, and it really begs the question of why is an altar such an important thing to a witch and to any kind of occult practitioner if they decide to use one. You know, how can we get the most out of it, and what can people who have religious trauma do around that word? Is there an alternative to the word altar that would be better? I'm going to offer an alternative word that a little bit later. We're going to look at altar to start with so we can really work out what we're going to be playing with in terms of change and in terms of the existing kind of paradigm, if you like, for what it is for. So altar itself comes from the term altus, which is high, right? It means high. It comes from the Latin meaning high. So we know immediately that it's something that's prominent, and we also know this from the fact it's linked to altare, which is podium, and so we get this sense of separation, that it's outside of the norm or the sort of general space. You know, it's not somewhere you put your socks on, for instance, right? It's not. So you're going to have this particular space, which is like, right, this has its own particular set of rules, right, separate to other things. And we also see it as being portable on occasions. In certain religions, there's an altar stone which can be taken by an officiant of some kind and placed onto a surface, so that that surface then becomes a sacred space, despite it not being in a temple or religious building of some kind, right? So we see there's a portability there. We also see this reflected in kind of witchy practice with people making altar tiles, where it's an altar tile that you can then take off and put on depending on seasonal celebration, but also you know, something that you can perhaps take with you if you happen to be away from your normal space, you know, on holiday or for whatever it is you might be doing. So we see a link to space, but we also see a link to the elements, right? And let's look at the sort of material side of things element wise first, right? We've got earth, and earth really would have probably made up the kind of earliest altars or the earliest sacred spaces. You think of barrows and you think of these, you know, piles of earth. You see this noted in the Hebrew Bible. You also see stone as well. If we look at the more pagan aspect of things, we see this in Old Norse with the term horga. Horga coming from Proto-Germanic haragaz, which is a pile of stones. And we're going to talk about this again a little bit later. So we see earth, we see stone, we also see wood from herg, which is Old English for a holy grove. And so we've got this sense of different materials, all generally natural, to be used for creating an altar, right? And that's the kind of material elements, if you like. This can help you if you're looking at putting an altar together to consider what do you want to make it out of, you know, and thinking about other questions around sort of location and things, which we're going to look at a little bit later too. So we've got the material elements. What about the more metaphysical side, element-wise? We often see in certain traditions the use of element representation on an altar. And it's entirely optional. But if we think about the fact that we're all made up of universal matter, and that essentially from the sort of Greek tradition, it all comes down to those four elements, earth, fire, wind, or for earth, fire, air and water, then we can consider that if we're trying to manipulate this sort of universal matter in some way or another, it might be worth having all those representations so that we've got some kind of balance, and so we can call on those elements if we so wish to mould our spell or to direct our spell or to direct our working if we're looking at just a sort of a ritual rather than a focused action. So we can see another link to elements and the etymology of the word altar, because it's linked to adelair, and adelair is really, it means to adore, to worship, to sacrifice, and especially there's a note on it being about burnt sacrifice or burnt offerings, right? And so burnt offerings immediately brings to mind fire, right? And this actually links us to that original definition, the focus of religious ritual, right? Or focus of ritual, if we don't want to include the religious part in there, right? So focus itself comes from hearth or heat, right? And traditionally we know a hearth would have been where all the cooking was done, everything would have been focused around that, it's heating the home. And so I think it's interesting to note that there's that link in the sort of definition of altar to fire itself, and fire really being considered one of those kind of really primary elements in terms of creation. So I think it's quite useful if you're going to have an altar to have some kind of representation of fire on there, be it a little tea light, be it a full-on pillar candle, be it an electric candle if you don't have the safety space to be able to do an actual flame, right? Or maybe you're in a living situation that means you can't do that. That's fine. It could be some string lights if you want. Do you know what I mean? It could be a picture, it could be a painting. So with the burnt side of things, if we can if we can incorporate the element of fire there, then we might want to look at burnt offerings such as some of our meal, right? We may want to burn it deliberately in a cauldron or a pan, if you've got a pan that's a bit old and on its way out. And you can offer those burnt offerings to the altar itself on perhaps a dish, on a bowl of some kind. You could also think of burnt offerings as being incense as well. Incense links us to air also, because we're thinking about how we have that transformation of the matter and into smoke, and then that smoke dissipating. It's kind of magically going up into the air. Now we know that's from the particles, diffusing essentially throughout, and that's fine. But historically, that would have seemed really quite magical. And for me, it still is today, right? It still is that kind of wondrous thing where you see the smoke form and then disappear, go somewhere else, and you may well think that is then going higher up, again altus high, to some kind of source, some kind of significant other. Maybe it's an ancestor you're thinking of, right? Or just the universe in general. But there is that sense of transformation and sending it into something else, and not the kind of material world as such. It's moving throughout. And like I say, we've got scientific explanations for these things, but if we're going to go with some wonder, then that use of incense can be great as a combination, not only of air but of fire as well. And obviously you do have the earth element with the material that it's made out of. Earth could also be something that is the structure, the surroundings of it, in terms of the altar. And when you're thinking about water is something that's obviously always handy if you're using anything that's a light, but it's also any kind of libations meaning a kind of offering of water of some kind, or offering of drink, offering of liquid. So you might offer some wine or some whiskey, or it could be any form of kind of alcohol. It could be water if you're not somebody who likes to have drink in the house, or it's something you're avoiding. It could be, some kind of juice. It could be whatever you want. It's just worth bearing in mind with anything liquid that's got a lot of sugar content, it's going to get mouldy and it's going to end up wanting to be refreshed, right? But these are different elements that you can incorporate as part of the altar itself. Maybe there are some suggestions you have around those different elements that you might represent differently, right? That might be a great sort of exercise to think of, how can I represent earth on this? How can I represent water and fire and air? What could I do differently? So that's our elemental side of things. And we know that I tell you what, actually, this is something I was thinking about as well with air, is not just the incense side of things, but also in terms of our breath, right? In terms of the breath that we have, perhaps we might do some kind of breathing exercises when we're at our altars, and also in terms of the words we speak. And if we happen to do any kind of chants, reciting anything particularly, that's using air again, and yeah. Also, you could think about music and things like that as the sort of incorporating the air element too. But moving forward, if we think of that space as a whole, right, we know that it's something that is apart, is something that is special, essentially. Then, we want to be able to engage with it and engage with it easily and comfortably. And an altar really could be any size. It could be something you have on a bookshelf. It could be something that you have, in a little box. It could be something you have, on its own separate stand, its own separate place. Maybe it is actually an altar that you've created on a table of some kind, right? But that word comfortable is quite key. So what happens when that word altar itself makes you feel a little uncomfortable there, whether that's through religious trauma or just generally trying to create something that's a little bit more tailored to you, right? Well, I was thinking about the definition of altar, and I was thinking on the fact that it's really something that's thought of for ritual purposes, and that we often think of that as a kind of group activity, although a lot of us are solitaries. So I was thinking, if a group of witches is a coven, and, in the past we've seen the word covenstead be used for where witches go to, right? There's even a hotel in Glastonbury called Covenstead. When we see this sort of use of that term for a gathering place of witches kind of for religious ritual, then why couldn't we do that for an individual as well as a coven? And so for me, I was looking at the term covenstead and I was thinking, okay, why stead, right? Well, stead itself comes from the Old English steed, meaning a place, right? But moreover, we see that it's a place or a kind of replacement. It's a substitute. It's in place of something. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about an altar, right? An altar is in place of the thing, the concept, the being, the element that you might be interacting with, right? It's in the place of that element. It represents that. And I thought that was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me, because stead could work very easily in any kind of witch's practice, regardless of their particular take, because stead is very neutral when it comes to any associations, right? It purely just means that place. So what do we put before stead? If we're not going to have coven there, then I thought maybe witchstead, right? But then I also thought about the specific actions that we have around our altars, and a lot of it is to do with offering, and whether that's just offering ourselves a moment to engage mindfully with the space, whether it's offering ourselves some meditation or an opportunity to focus on some kind of celebration that we might be using the altar for. We're also offering to maybe a universal matter itself, maybe a particular deity if that's your thing, maybe it's an ancestor, maybe it's the house or land spirits, and maybe it's a cause, right? It could be an offering to a cause. Maybe you're looking at fighting for trans rights, or you're looking at fighting for justice around abortion rights and things like that, right? All this place really is an offering stead. It's offering your time, it's offering your resources, it's offering your energy of some kind. So I was thinking about offerstead, right? And I thought there must be some kind of precedence here, because I always like to look at terms, because it's rare that there's kind of like an original idea as such. We always, humans have been around for a while, so we often share similar concepts and we come to similar conclusions. And I found some interesting stuff, and this links us back to Holga, which is the Old Norse term for a pile of stones. And that really is funny how these things come about, isn't it? Because when I looked up Holga, once I found that term out, I found some really interesting translations. And there's a section from the Elder Edda, a particular passage, which talks about a chap called Ottar. And Ottar is very good at making offerings to the goddesses, and in his particular sort of thing. And this is noted especially by Freya. This also partially puts paid to the concept that you can only interact with spirits or deities in a group level for them to listen, because this is a case of an individual making offerings. And sometimes we see, especially in different environments, the emphasis that you have to have a group, you have to be in a group to raise a certain energy to gain the attention of a particular being. But this is a primary source that we see really says actually that's not necessarily the case. We know that there are personal relationships with deities that happen and are noticed. And whether we want to have the deity aspect in there, or whether we're thinking about more of a universal matter, whether it's a psychopomp kind of thing we're thinking, whether it's just a psychological aspect, if we're linking with the kind of collective consciousness, whatever it might be, this kind of says to us, we can reach out there and it's noticed. And for me, finding trying to think about the term offering stead, thinking about the term witch stead, it gave me a lovely little moment of discovering, right? So in the Elder Edda, essentially, there's different translations, right? Freya says, "An offer stead to me he raised with stones constructed. Now is a stone as glass become, with the blood of oxen he newly sprinkled it. Ottar ever trusted, the Assigneur." This is Benjamin Thorpe. This goes back to 1866. So, offerstead is a term we can see, not quite offering stead, but very, very close. And so we see there's some kind of precedence there. And whilst precedence isn't essential in terms of building practice, it is nice to know that their concept, you're pretty close to the mark, right? So we have an alternative to altar, which is neutral, which is something that anybody can apply, and it's offerstead or offering stead. Now, because I think that sometimes it's worth having different areas of what would traditionally be called an altar space for different beings or concepts, I would call the entire place where you're offering a witch stead, because it's your space, right? It's your space for witch activity. And then I would call the specific spaces offering steads or offer steads, right? So you've got the witch place itself, right? And then you've got, within the witch place, you've got your offering places, right? So not the whole witch place will be an offering place necessarily. There might be parts of it, but the whole place itself has some kind of significance which carries aside from everything else, right? For me, it's this corner, right? For me, this is my corner, and I'm going to share it in a bit more detail with you in just a moment or two. For other people, it might be a bookshelf, it might be a box, it might be anything that you can, access. It might be a book. Maybe you're using a book as an altar, a notebook. Maybe you're drawing your altars out. Maybe you're having an altar or creating an altar in your mind, right? These are all things you can do, and creating an altar in your mind is quite a handy thing to use if you're looking at working on, visualization and things like that. Some people struggle with it, and that's fine. There's no reason why you can't talk something aloud, and there's no reason why you can't draw it out or type it out, right? It could be, something that you create in emojis if you really want to, if we're going to go down the chaos magic kind of route, right? But all of this really is to say that when we are looking at making a space, we need to make it a space that is comfortable for us to engage with and that we want to engage with. Because what's the point in having an altar if it's just there to look pretty, right? Yeah, sure, have an aesthetic altar, have an art altar, that's fine. But ultimately with witchcraft, right, as we see Althea Sebastiani say in their book Rust of Nail, Prick of Thorn, it's witchcraft, not witch think, right? It's something that we do, it's something that we engage with, do the magical thing. That's the whole point of this channel, is it's something we do and engage with. So with your altar, think about how you're really going to make it a space that witch's space, that's something that you own, that is yours, right? And think about, how you're going to be able to enjoy that space, as well as, have that sort of build up of sacred kind of energy there, that sacred sort of concept, that sacred separation from the everyday. So just some thoughts there really on altar itself, an alternative to altar as witchstead or offerstead within the witchstead. And I think it's something that really there's a lot to think about. And so I'm going to break it down, the thoughts that you might have when constructing an altar, when thinking about, thinking about the whole concept. It can be a bit overwhelming. And so we're going to look at some different ways of working out how to break down how we can go about making the altar something we really get a lot out of. And before that, I'm going to show you my witchy space too. So we've done the magical theory, let's do the magical thing. Okay, witches, so normally you see this behind me, the stead here, and there's various sort of levels to it. You're going to have to forgive sound and vision, because I'm not going to be using the tripod, and this will be in various places. So yeah, we'll see. Thank you once again, Paintbox Soapworks, for this wonderful mic stand, which has made life so much easier. To start with, actually, let's look at this lovely little charm that I have, which is a 1940s silver charm of a witch, and she's really lovely because she's on her broom. I thought she'd be great to get the message out there, and I've called her Media, not as in the Greek, but Media as in Media, because there's a quote from Eliphas Levi, which is, those speaking about magic are the media of the divine word. And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it. I thought it was an interesting way to sort of conceptualise things when I'm having self-doubt, and to try and make sure that I'm, you know, putting stuff out there that helps you, and thinking about the fact that is this something that is adding, you know, to the witchy sphere, and to people's practice, or is it something that's more of an ego trip? And so that's why sometimes I do have those absences, because I'm thinking, you know, is this worth your time? But I'm hoping that this is, and I'm hoping that I certainly get interested in people's altars and things like that. So I hope that this will be something that, you know, appeals to you. But I really wanted to sort of note that this lovely charm, because I was so pleased to be able to get her, and yeah, it's great. What's interesting is she's got a hood rather than a hat, right? So I was surprised by that, and she's also got little slippers on. So I just love that. I love that thing. I love it like she's kind of been called up quick to get out to the coven meeting, or to go off and do a spell quick because her neighbour, you know, has had a pickle and she needs to go over there and sort it out. And she's put on her jacket and she's put on her hat and she's gone, oh blimey, off I go. Ta-ra, see you in, you know, see you in half hour, I'll be back. So yeah, but anyway, that's my little communication witch, Media. So yeah. Now, in terms of the actual offerstead, I've got decks up here, various decks. Well, I can show you in more detail actually. Let me flip this camera around now that we're looking more in this direction. So I've got, a few decks over here. I tend to be a bit choosy about my decks because I don't want to take up too much. I've got enough stuff on it as it is, let alone having, you know, more decks than I need. But I've got a few different ones, whether they're, you know, more original or and this is a book to original deck, which I'll show you the decks really in more detail in a separate video around the decks. This is a local artist who's done Tarot of Famous Witches. I'm just going to shout them out. That's Rachel Ford, and this is a really cool little deck, which is just the Major Arcana, but well worth a look. But yeah, so a few decks over here, and I've also got some candles and things. At the moment I'm tending to sort of try and make my own more than use generic spell candles, but obviously that takes a bit of time, and if I need something off the cuff, then I'll be using my collection there. I've got my little gargoyle here. The gargoyle is part of my warding system, and yeah, I sort of have various things that I have for warding and such as a little network. Other divination tools along here, and my crystals. Crystals are something at the moment that I am researching more into around, you know, ethical use. There are, you know, for instance, I recently got a turquoise necklace, a Cornish turquoise necklace, because I didn't want to get one from North America, because I know that turquoise has spiritual significance there. So I deliberately sourced a Cornish turquoise necklace from Cornwall, because it's, you know, to my native UK, and also I've got family links to Cornwall, so it just felt quite appropriate. But it was important to me for the queer representation and the magical representation that we see in the original Pride flag. So yeah, more is discussed on that in the queer video that I did, which was Take Pride Witches, I think. This little sign is just very silly. I got it from a Halloween shop that popped up in the big mall that's nearby, and this is just, yeah, it's a bit of fun. I love putting it on there when well, just in general, but also especially when I'm working, I'm moving you know, something around. It can also work as an effective ward, you know, for any kind of spirits who are friendly, but I don't want to have messing with my magical workings. Admittedly, I normally will call any sort of, you know, spirits in that are, you know, aligned with the family or myself. But yeah, just a bit of fun, that one. So we've also got along here my cauldron itself. This old ally I've had for most of my practice, and it is just, yeah, it's one of those things I adore. I got this and the little candlesticks up there from Cat and Cauldron in Glastonbury, and And actually, the person who runs Cat and Cauldron, or one of the people who runs Cat and Cauldron, or did rather, because they have now gone to online only, is Liz Williams, Dr. Liz Williams rather, who wrote this book that I recommend, and yeah, very good. Do definitely read it. In fact, they sell them with the candlesticks. But yeah, ran a bit of trivia. Anyway, this big old thing. Yeah, I've taken it to group rituals, I've taken it pretty much anywhere I can, and it was very fun to walk around Glastonbury when I first bought it with this, using it as a shopping bag essentially when I was grabbing my other witchy bits. I always do various wardings. This is iron, and yeah, I'll talk about wardings more in another video. This is a book I'm particularly fond of, and I have it on display because I adore the front of it. It feels like a spirit in and of itself. I'm very much an animist witch, and I just adore all the different imagery, and especially the little toad, which is wonderful. You know I love toads, and some of you know my magical name is the Grand Toad. We've also got along here issues of, I'm trying to think what it's called now, Conjuration, from the Witchcraft, or the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cornwall. This comes out quarterly-ish, and it's quite interesting so far to see different highlights of different exhibits. I've got representations of the elements at the back here. One of the things that I really wanted on here was a kind of representation in a potion sort of bottle style, because potion bottles are just one of those things you just, it's very tangible, and they feel very much yeah, just super fun. I love the thing. They always remind me of that bit in BFG, the original one, where he's looking at all the different dreams in bottles. Speaking of dreams, this is my representation of universal matter. I've called this Ilum. I painted this some time back now, and this really is, if you remember me talking about Ilum in earlier videos, essentially Ilum is described as the stuff that came out of the egg that cracked at the Big Bang. So it's all that stuff we're made up of. And this is really something that I focus on during certain meditations, or invocations or gratitudes and things like that. But it's one of those things that I just, yeah, it's very kind of liminal for me. And yeah, I just love it. I also did an Ace of Wands picture, which is a little rougher, and I like being quite messy with paintings and using different things. So I use like palette knives and the back of paint brushes and fingers and stuff. But yeah, I've got these kind of little guardians here. My friend Jen, shout out to you, got those for me. And I have different gifts that various folks have given me, and cards and such like, and other sort of tools and things that I use. So yeah, all things that I really appreciate. This is my Nan, shout out to Nan, you're probably watching this, watching me, and this is my lovely grandparents. So yeah, that was something that I really appreciate your support, Nan and Grandad. You're both really inspirational to me, and I really appreciate all your insights. So thank you. And pictures really form quite an important part of my offering, instead of my witch stead. This, if we start from the middle, this is kind of the main space of working, and really with this is where I'll have my incense burning. Depending on sort of what it is, I'll either use the water-based essential oils, or I'll use the granule-based as well. I have these two representations here of, the hand. The hand's often something that I've found to be my kind of magical powerhouse, really, where I find that I can feel the sense of energy the most. And that's just me. Obviously everyone's different, but I found my hands are particularly helpful for that. And so for me, this one represented peace, and not only peace, but if you're creating a space of peace, then that's a welcoming space. So it's about welcoming as well. And because of the gold, it's about welcoming abundance and really that kind of concept around health and wealth. And then this one, I got this one first because in the UK, to have the two fingers up is to be like F off, basically. And so I love that as a warding, especially because it came in black. So I had to get those two. And this I got to go with it. And also because of that kind of egg shape, and again reflecting the egg of the the painting. I've got other accoutrements there. Currently I've got some copper there that I'm messing about with, finding out the magical. I found this is a bit I found on the road with a lovely patina there. Copper's often thought of as representing Venus, and we can all do with a bit of love in our life, can't we? So I thought interesting to use as a focus. So looking at other parts of the witch's stead, I have my ancestor stead, if you like, my offer stead for my ancestors. I always make offerings once a month on a new moon, and this is because I think, new moon is something that we don't see necessarily, or a dark moon is something we can't see, but it's still there, and just like your ancestors, just like spirits and things like that you can't necessarily see, but they have that kind of presence there. And this was if you remember from the ancestors video some time back, I made this to represent the qualities of my ancestors and things that I really, wanted to bring forward into myself there. I've got, various pictures and things. I've got different cards, and the bells I use to kind of announce the offerings. A bit like someone, serving at a restaurant, you would ring the bell when the offering's done. So when I place the offerings down, I give the bell a ring, and it's just making them aware that a new offering's taken place. I have a representation of a grave that I've made here that I use for more kind of intense travelling in terms of, having a kind of meditative focus around ancestors. And this is a card I pulled when I was really discussing ancestor, or when I was doing an ancestor spread, I think it was, on either a birthday or somewhere around then. And I was asking for, general sort of what the ancestors could tell me and what guidance I could have. And after a few cards acknowledging, some challenging times I had in the past, this card rocked up, which was Grower. And Grower is from Norse myth, which is something I, do have an interest in. And it was really interesting to see that Grower was that person, because it's a very kind of maternal card. That's something that, I've had grew up with a narcissistic mother, and so this was definitely a card that was very healing to me, because it was sort of stepping in and being that energy that I needed when I was younger. So this is a really lovely kind of cherishing card. Grower came back from the dead to support their child in their quest, and so it kind of feels like this ancestor coming back from the dead, making themselves known and being like, hey, I know you've had some challenges, but I'm here. And I just think it's a lovely, glorious card, and I really use that as a focus. So what else do we have? I've got other little things and bobs. I will go into sort of more detail on individual ones maybe at another time, just to keep this short. Well, I say short, you know what I'm like. So this side, we've got the house spirit and land spirit focus points here, again with the offerings. And these are all things I've got from various different places, locally, or from the bits of stone, bits of wood, anything that I've kind of come across. And what's lovely, this here, I'll give a shout out to my friend Jay. They got this from this tree, right? This tree, that's me, would you believe it, back in the 90s. And that tree was something I really adored. This was in the city where I used to go and visit my dad and his girlfriend, and we used to go, this tree was very much outside the flat, and being from the countryside, going into the city was kind of like, whoa, this is a bit crazy. And so I really love this tree for the fact that it was that little piece of home. Unfortunately, it kind of fell down in a storm, and my friend Jay was up there on a mission of some kind, I can't remember what, and they managed to get a little piece of the bark for me from the stump that remains. So it probably won't be there for much longer, but I just adore that I've got a little piece of that from way back when. I've probably touched that years ago, and crazy. So yeah, other spots really on this witch's stead are tools, anything that I'm using for any kind of magical spell or recipe, any sort of things like the sweets for my offerings, books, of course, there's always endless books, and other bits and bobs to sort out. I've got all my incenses and things like that in here, which is generally my sort of drawer of mischief. So that's kind of the offering stead as a whole. Like I say, it's really kind of an offering corner with my, witches corner I also have the book shelf here, the kind of ladder desk if you like, and all the lovely books that I sort of have to hand. I've got various other bits and bobs about the place because I'm a bit of a maximalist sometimes. So yeah, but hopefully that gives you some insight really into my space, and you know, perhaps some ideas around what you want. Like I say, forgive the camera work and forgive the sound, but we're going to look now at your space and what we can do around your offering stead, your witch stead, your altar, if that's a term you prefer. And we're going to ask ourselves some questions. So let's get to it. Okay, witches, here's our magical thing to do. We're going to ask ourselves some questions so that when we're setting up our altars or resetting them, that we're really getting something meaningful and useful out of it, because it's quite easy to just chuck a load of stuff on the surface and, you know, 2 weeks later you haven't touched it, or there's things, you know, tools that you really know you're never going to use. You know, you may have spilt some stuff everywhere, maybe you've, you know, burnt the surface. So we really want to just make sure that we're giving ourselves the best start so that this space that we're using can be as congruent as we can. And I'm using my little offering stead tile here, really as a base for all of this. So let's have a little fish in here. What have we got? Right, well, number one is, why do you want an altar? And this is really a key question to ask yourself. Do you really need one? Is it something that you are doing just because everyone else is doing it? Do you feel it's going to benefit you? Asking yourself why and getting the answer to that is going to be quite key, because when you know why you're doing something, it gives you a reason to continue to do it. So that's our first one, which is our why. What else do we have here? How will you clean it? So how will you clean it? Now, this is something that isn't very much considered, and it's a bit of a boring one, right? But you've got to think about what surface you're using. Is there things that are going to be, you know, damaging to that surface? Is it going to be made out of a porous material? You know, we want to think about how we're going to get rid of those spell remnants, those ritual remnants. So that's our how. What do we have here? Who or what will it be for? So this is another thing to ask. An altar can be just for yourself. It can be somewhere you just, like I say before, offering your time, you know, a bit of you time to it. It can be just a place for meditation. It can be for a particular being. And you know, with my witch stead, that I have the witch stead as a whole, but there are spaces within it for particular things, right? So who or what will it be for? This is, again, another key question. So we can put this in who or what, but let's put it in who, why not? So how many will you have? And again, like I say, you know, I've got maybe 2, 3, 4, probably 5 offering steads or altars, and you know, for various different reasons. And sometimes I'll have a separate altar for an ancestor if it's a birthday or a death day. Yeah, how many are you going to have? How many do you need? This all dictates or how much space and how many things you put on to said altar or said offering space. Now, what do we have here? Oh, it's gone a jumping. What could stain or spill? Now, this sounds like, again, another boring question, but again, if we're looking at, you know, maybe getting ourselves a nice altar cloth, you know, we don't want to be having to constantly keep cleaning it. So think about what dishes you might use to catch, you know, potential spillage, right? Are you going to be using perhaps a tray that is easily wiped? Is there, you know, again, a surface that will be stained by any dyes that might be in candles, and obviously with essential oils as well. That's something to consider. So just consider what could stain or spill. Sometimes stains and spills are one of those things that are nice kind of reminders of past things. You know, nothing's going to be perfect forever, but if we can avoid it, then that's great. What do we have next? Where will you put it? So where will you put it sounds like a bit of you know, an obvious question, but it's something worth considering, because you might want to think about directions if you have a particular, you know, interest in directions and their associations, you know, whether that's your own associations or your practices. Also, in terms of your space, you know, where is reasonable to put it? You know, realistically, how much, you know, room do you have? And, you know, will it get knocked into? Really thinking about, you know, if we're making this a separate space, how can we keep that sacredness around it? So that is your where. What else do we have in here? When will you make offerings. So that's if you do make offerings. Generally, I would say an altar exists for offering or for interaction of some kind. So when you're going to make offerings, if it's going to be, just purely the meditation side of things, is that going to be an everyday thing? Is it going to be once a week thing? If it's ancestors, if it's house spirits and things, are you going to do it monthly, or is it going to be, a little bit of every meal? What would it be? It's really up to you. Is it going to be something that you can use in terms of, or can put out, in a dish, in a bowl? When are you going to make those offerings, and when are you going to take them away as well? That's the thing to consider. Is it going to be 24 hours? Is it going to be overnight? Is it going to be for a period of time? In which case, that will dictate what kind of offerings you are indeed offering. So when will you make your offerings? Consider moon phases, consider, star signs and things and astrology and such like. Consider days and events, particular days. Maybe you'll make an offering to particular causes, on like a National Workers' Day, or, it could be at Stonewall you make an offering to your queer ancestors and things like that. So that's another when. Or indeed our first when, actually. What have we got here? What will you offer? So this links us to, how you're going to clean it. It links us to what could stain and spill. Because, what you're going to offer, is it going to be foodstuffs? Is it going to be paintings? Is it going to be, a letter? What kind of things? Does it need something to be put under it to keep it nice and neat? Is it going to be something that's going to get mouldy? Is it going to attract any flies? Have you got pets? Are they going to be hanging around? Are they going to sniff it and eat it? And, is it going to be safe for them? So what are you going to offer? And also consider offerings in terms of, what are you offering to? By understanding that, you'll understand what offerings might be good, right? So I know some of my ancestors like gin, and so I offer a nice gin. I know historically that dairy products are generally considered good for house spirits and things like that, but I know that's going to go off. So I look at the other alternatives, which are things like alcohol and things. I've got a nice whiskey that I offer mine, but you could equally, provide something else. So that is another what. Okay. Who is interacting with it? Now, this is more related to the individuals rather than the offering place or altar itself. So who is interacting with it? Really, you're thinking about, is this a group offering space? Is it a group altar? Is it just me? Also, like I say, are there going to be any animals around who might knock things off? If it is a group altar, then are there going to be representations of the group in some way there? How are they going to interact with it? How are they going to connect with it? If it's just your own thing, that's not so much of a bother, but that's worth considering. Okay, where's our up here? Right, this is a big one. So how will you represent the element, beings or concept? So if you are using it for one of these things, then how are you going to represent it? Are you going to use it, a painting? Are you going to have some candles lit? Are you going to have, a statue of some kind? These are the things you want to have a little think about. Maybe there's a particular book, if it's a concept, that is quite good, or a symbol. Maybe there's a sigil you could use. How are you going to go about it? These are things worth just digging a little deeper on to consider. We've also got, does it need to be portable? This one's pretty self-explanatory. Are you going to need to move it? Then is the stuff going to be fragile? And, is that a point where you need to think about either wrapping up them when you're sending them or travelling around and bring them with you? Or is it the fact that you're going to use something a bit more sturdy that might well, keep a bit better in travelling? So maybe rather than using ceramic cups, if you're going to be using cups to represent water, maybe you use a metal cup or something similar. So that's another question. Actually, I don't know, that doesn't actually fit in any of those. That's a little wild card, that one. What could break, fade or set light? So if you're going to have crystals and things and there's a light source, then you might want to consider whether it's going to fade. If certain crystals will fade in sunlight. And what could break? So again, if we've got animals, little kids, anything like that that's going to be wandering around it, what is going to be easy to break? What's going to fall off? What could cause a domino effect? And if it's particularly precious, consider repositioning it. And what could set light? When I have my my incense burning, I'm quite conscious of how what's above it. If there shouldn't really be anything above it. Obviously, I do have it set in a little square, but I'm always conscious of making sure that it's not getting hot, and it's also in terms of above it, so it's not getting hot. I'm making sure that if I'm using it for a prolonged period of time, then I'm moving it away from any kind of, surface. But also when it is something that's set alight like that, like a candle, I'm thinking what's around it. Are there any sort of curtains, or are there any, we're quite fond of certain witches are quite fond of lots of frilly, lacy things, and so consider, is there any decorations that might be a bit of an issue there? Is there anything that's going to have a prismatic effect? If light goes through it, is it going to then focus that light on something and set light? So just consider what's around it, what could set light, and think about precautions you can make by having some water nearby, things like that. And also, how will you move around it? So if you're someone who is has got some movement issues, anything like that, then you might want to consider sort of where you're putting it. Can you move around it easily? If you're just looking to approach it from one side, that's fine, that's generally pretty easy. But it's just thinking about you and making it easy for you, because ultimately we want to be able to use this and make it a meaningful and practical part of our craft. So how will you move around it? Are you going to approach it from the front? Are you going to be able to access it from all sides? That's really something that's worth considering, because we really think of the stuff on it rather than what is surrounding it. So that's another one to consider. Another thing to ask yourself perhaps would be, how are you going to ward it or protect it? And think about that. It's always worth doing. Like I said, I've got various wards that I talk about and I don't talk about, and it's all really kind of a big net. I would recommend a really good book on the subject of home warding, which is, I'm going to get it for you now. I'm just fishing it out of my bookshelf. So I'd highly recommend Of Rust of Nail and Prick of Thorn by Althea Sebastiani. So yeah, check that out. But do check it out, and check out your own thoughts on this. This is about you ultimately and your practice. So we've done the magical theory, magical thing, and until next time, health and wealth.